tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
Justin Trudeau is saying it's his way or the highway, except there's no highway because Stephen Guilbeault wants to effectively ban roads. So tough for all of us here. Let's delve into this with Colin Craig. He is the president of secondstreet.org, which does a lot of tremendous work on healthcare, which is, I think, at its core, a federalism debate that takes place. And I know he's also done work on carbon taxes and the like as well. Colin, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today. Just before we delve into the meat of the carbon tax stuff, what do you make of this fractured relationship between provinces and the government? We're not just talking here about, one lone renegade Western premier that is having difficulty with the Trudeau policy. You've got 7 of 10 premiers representing the majority of the population and of the provinces that are saying to the government, stop doing this thing.
Well, look, it's always interesting and entertaining when a policy you think is a failure starts to fail and everyone can see it, at least almost everyone. I mean, at its core, the carbon tax is bad public policy. There's no doubt about it. The way that the federal government has gone about this, it's bad public policy. It's failing. I think most politicians are able to smell that out. They can see it's bad policy. It's not a good decision. And so they're rebelling. Like you said, at the provincial level, you've got all these premiers. You said 7. I think there's a case to argue that Wab Kinu's maybe 7.5, 8, because he's basically rejected the policy by cutting their own provincial gas tax to give Manitobans some breathing room there. So, I think you've got most politicians in the country realizing and saying this is a bad policy. You got to back away from it. Canadians are struggling right now. Businesses are struggling. Certainly many of them are. And yet you've got the Prime Minister just going full steam ahead on a really bad policy. It's bad politics too, Andrew. I mean, look, he's down and out in the polls. He's way behind. Cost of living is the number one issue, and he just keeps raising taxes. Like, it's a bad decision politically. It's bad economically. It is what it is now.
Well, and look, I ran for office once previously, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that of all the thousands and thousands of doors I knocked on and people I spoke to, when I asked what your number one issue was, only one person out of I think 22,000 doors said environment. And that's not to say it's not an issue that matters. It's not to say it's an issue that matters to people, but it tends to be issues like that, in my experience, tend to be secondary when your house is on fire. And by that, I mean your economic house. When you can't afford groceries, when you can't afford to fill up your car. A lot of these things look like luxury items. And I think it would be reasonable for the government to say, listen, we think that, just to use their own framing for a moment, I think that climate is really important. I think carbon tax is the best way to get there. However, I realize that right now Canadians are struggling. We're going to just put a pause on this while still committing to the overall policy and objective. But the issue is they know if they do that, they're going to have to be the ones that reintroduce it at a certain point. But you're right that it's bad politics also, because right now you have 7.5 fingers pointing at the federal government saying, you guys are the reason that people are having to deal with this increase. And that's not something they had when they first sold this policy.
No, it's not. I mean, let's step back for a second here. When has a prime minister in this country created a tax for everyone else but himself? I mean, there's probably only a handful of people in this country that don't really have to pay the carbon tax. The prime minister. Why? Because you and I and all your viewers and all the taxpayers in this country pay to heat his residence. So he's not paying the carbon tax when he has to heat his residence. He's not filling up any car at the pumps like the rest of us, right? He gets chauffeured around. Someone's always paying for his transportation. Doesn't have to pay for it there. I mean, taxpayers pay, I believe, for some of his groceries and meals and so forth. So he's essentially created this tax that he doesn't have to pay, everyone else does. And so that could be part of why he doesn't understand why so many people are upset. Never mind the fact that he's making close to $400,000 a year. He's got a golden pension and so forth. I mean, he's not feeling this issue the same way that everyday Canadians are. His cabinet certainly isn't either. I mean, they're extremely well paid, again, golden pension and so forth. They don't have to feel that. But, I think media need to maybe point that out to him. The second thing is why I think this is failing is just look at his own behavior, right? I mean, since he declared a climate emergency in Parliament, he's traveled to Costa Rica twice. He's traveled down to Jamaica twice. He's flown to Montana. He's gone to Tofino a couple times. Like, I mean, he's flying all over the place in the government's private jet. And I don't think anyone can begrudge a prime minister for wanting to have some vacation time. But he is saying that there's a climate emergency, and he is routinely getting into an airplane, flying all over the place, and creating all kinds of unnecessary emissions by his own standard. So, I mean, he is just demonstrating that the carbon tax has failed, or else he would have changed his own behavior, and he hasn't. So,
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that there tends to be, from defenders of the carbon tax, a significant overstatement of how many of these carbon emitting things are optional or elective for people. I mean, if you live in the country and you've got to drive your kids to school 50 minutes or something, or if you have to drive to work a certain distance, or if you need to buy groceries for your family, I mean, these are not discretionary things. So the average Canadian is forced to just look at the increased price and say, okay, I guess I'm paying that, and not say, maybe I'm only going to drive 3/4 of the way to school this morning.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. You talked about Manitoba before. I'm from there originally. I mean, it gets extremely freezing cold in the winter. It's not like you can, as you just noted, you can't just go, yeah, maybe we'll go without heat this winter. No, you'll die. You'll die if you don't have proper heat in Manitoba in the winter. I mean, we just, for our TV show, we did an episode on heat pumps recently, and people keep talking about heat pumps. Very fascinating technology. Maybe it gets better in the future, but you're not surviving in Manitoba all winter on a heat pump. It just won't work. You need to have that natural gas component. Maybe a heat pump can help a bit, but we're not there. I mean, we need these things like natural gas to heat our homes. We need things like gasoline to power our vehicles and so forth. I mean, the idea that we're all switching to electric cars anytime soon, that's fantasy. They cost a fortune, and a lot of households are struggling right now to get by, and never mind having to drop $50,000 or whatever on an electric car. Like, this doesn't add up, Andrew.
No, it certainly does not. Colin Craig from secondstreet.org, great work there. I wanted to ask you briefly, just while I had you here, about Mark Holland, because I know this he got under your skin this past week, I think.
He did, yeah. I mean, he's another example, I think, of how the elite in this country are often detached from everyday people. I mean, if you're a politician, you got a lot of money and resources. If you ever face a long wait time in the healthcare system, you can go abroad. You don't have to worry about it. And he was kind of poo-pooing people that do that and saying, like, it's not necessary. We can't allow that to happen in Canada, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, a lot of people are suffering in this country. It's not just the wealthy that are going abroad. I mean, we're talking all the time with middle-income people who are doing it. They're suffering. They're living with chronic pain, and people can't do that for a year or two. It's inhumane. So we need health reform. We need a mature discussion about this in this country to start to see these reforms happen. And Ottawa's approach is, let's just throw more money at the healthcare system and hope things work out. And it's not adding up. I mean, we've got to move beyond this simply throwing money at the system stage. And Mark Holland, I don't think it's the minister to take us there.
Colin Craig, thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, Andrew. Always appreciate the chat.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.